15 cents for a round-trip journey. Pasadena resident Horace Dobbins bankrolled the construction. So this was a true public-private partnership, and the governor got behind it as well. Where is it now, I wonder? Anybody know? It's the 110 freeway. Okay. Cities started to really grow at a fast pace as the immigrants from around the world hit our shores, and density was really a given. We didn't have the money to have single-family homes, out in the suburbs. It just wasn't a reality for people. And so now we talk about the sharing economy. The sharing economy was well underway in the early 1900s. In every major city, people shared their parks, they shared clothes and passed it down from one generation to the next. Women would go work in factories, and one woman would take care of 5 families' children. Cities peaked in popularity in the early 1900s, and the whole garden movement started. Garden cities, which were self-contained communities, green belts with residences, industry, and agriculture. And the earliest tenements were built on these 25-foot wide lots as part of the build-out of the New York City grid. The Chicago rail yards came about, and Chicago is still the center for rail transportation. And when I was DOT commissioner, I had to spend a lot of time on this. It's not sexy stuff, but a quarter of the country's freight comes through Chicago. And the bike. The bike was actually a big part of the transportation system in the early 1900s. There were over 200 companies in Chicago that produced bikes and bike parts and equipment. And actually it started out that the wealthy rode bikes because they could afford them, and the rest of society walked or rode in horse and buggy and so on. I love this picture. In fact, that second bike, I'd love to have that bike. That's an old grass racer. This is, I think this guy's name, Percy Neville is this guy's name, 11 years old, messenger boy. We had different labor laws back then. By the way, at age 11, he had worked for like 3 different companies for 4 years. So he started working when he was 7. And we had bike shops. In fact, this bike shop actually manufactured bikes as well in Chicago. And God, I don't know what you would call this. Well, this was when people came back from the war, sort of like a cyclovia, maybe, right? Like an old school cyclovia. But keep in mind, in 1919, there were only 8,000 automobiles in the United States. So people really did run the streets with their feet. More bikes. There were cycle clubs. And for those of you that know anything about me, you may know that I had a food truck business in like 2007 and 8. We had 8 food trucks, 8 electric custom-built food trucks, and I thought we were really doing something innovative, and I realized they were doing this 100 years ago, although they were serving hot dogs. Rush hour was extremely busy in cities. Every user was present. I don't know if every user was accommodated very well. And if you look at the issues that we're having now with the conflict between different modes, the cars are mad at the people on the bikes, and the bikes and the cars are sometimes mad at the pedestrians who just walk off the sidewalk, and you guys get $250 tickets here if you walk off the sidewalk at the wrong time. I'd be getting a ticket constantly, probably. But you can see they had the same conflicts 90 years ago. Here you got a horse and buggy, a streetcar, and one of those newfangled automobiles all conflicting in the street with pedestrians. Times Square, as I said, there were 8,000 cars in the early 1900s, like 1905, 1909. By 1920, guess how many cars there were? Anyone have a guess? 8 million. So that's how fast things can change. And that level of change, we were talking about this last night over dinner, this linear change versus this exponential change that you see with technology, whether it's the automobile and the combustion engine back then, or now with the internet, autonomous vehicles will be here in 5 to 6 years. Car sharing, ride sharing, taxis are all going to be the same thing. We're going to see that same exponential change over the next decade. So we have to be ready for it from a public policy standpoint. So then we have the New Deal. Now this is when we started to do all these road and utility projects during the Great Depression to provide relief for out-of-work folks. We also started to make major investments in bridges, and some of these projects were just monumental, just amazing. we started to fly. The streetcars were still around, and they connected our neighborhoods within cities. So you had, rail lines and cars connecting cities, but then the streetcars were really what connected the neighborhoods. And it's no coincidence that when we lost the streetcars, we lost a lot of our population in cities. People felt like they were abandoned in their cities without a mode of transportation. Then the freeways started to come. Pretty moderate freeways, probably about the same width as your streets now here in downtown LA. As the freeways grew, they still kept the streetcars running. This is the Hollywood Freeway, which I think this was one of the busiest, or the busiest freeway in the United States. But then the Federal Highway Act came. And when the Federal Highway Act came, the purpose was to build interstate highways. So to build highways to connect our states and our major cities. Not such a bad idea, I guess. We started to build bridges over the highways. People started to buy cars and move out of the city. But then we really made some huge errors. Then we decided it wasn't enough to build the freeways and the highways up, or I should say the highways, to the city limits. We wanted to tear the heart out of our cities, segregate our cities, or at least that's what we did, and destroy our cities by building freeways through them. And this happened in most American cities. And the old cities, it was really painful, like New York, DC. And then, post-war, everybody wanted to live like everybody else, and the American dream was the suburbs, right? So Levitts came up with their Levitts houses, and everybody had their nice little house. It was more about separation and ownership, because people were coming up after the war, no more communal living in the tenements, right? And it was the dawn of suburbia. So we developed this huge land use problem. And a cultural shift. Our culture moved to an automobile culture. And we started to define ourselves around our cars, which we're still suffering with now. And there are ramifications of that. People stopped sharing, started consuming at a higher rate, spending more time in traffic than with their families in the name of quality of life. And we did a great job of marketing the whole thing too. So yeah, you're going to spend 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours a day in your car, but look, you have fabulous aerodynamic styling, so who cares? And the American dream was born. 3 cars and a lawnmower. And we loved our cars so much that we even could watch movies in them. And this is one aspect of the American car culture I actually miss. I'm old enough to remember drive-ins and going to the A&W root beer place where the ladies would come out in roller skates and serve you onion rings and root beer. It's a little sad to see that go away. There's this Steak and Shake. And we did such a great job of marketing that you didn't even need to get out of your Ford GT to have a picnic. You could do it right there on your car. But again, there are ramifications. As the cultural landscape changed, our physical landscape changed dramatically as well. And I know that today is just because of the fire, so. And you can see city after city, the highways really caused a rift in the city. Now here's DC, Pennsylvania Avenue, where I live now. And unfortunately, we lost the streetcar there too, but we're bringing the streetcar back. We're bringing it back. It's being built on H Street. It was one of the proud accomplishments that I had, was making sure that that project happened. And we reallocated the space that was for the streetcar, and we did this relatively quickly for the Pennsylvania Ave bike lanes, which really make a statement, I think, to all the people that visit Washington, D.C. about the importance of the bike as transportation. And a lot of tourists use it as well. And so the message that I wanted to give here was, when you're looking for space to retrofit your streets, look at where you used to have other things happening, like the streetcar. You probably have a lot of excess capacity on those streets. And you could look, somebody gave me a map of the old streetcar lines. I bet you could build a new transit network or a bike transit network on those streets without too much trouble. Well, depending on how you look at it. Luckily, though, we'd invested in subways, at least in some cities, and we were moving people underground fast. but obviously there's not much of a view. So you do lose something. You gain speed, but you lose that, you lose seeing the city at human scale that you get in a streetcar. And I actually got into a Twitter sort of battle the other day, a friendly battle with some people saying, why do streetcar? Just do BRT. And I was saying, the two are totally different. I mean, bus rapid transit traditionally is meant to move people at a fast clip. Streetcar is just meant to move people. And it's meant to create a sense of place and increase real estate values and so on and so forth. So in Chicago, we're carrying, actually this is old, we're carrying about 1.8 million people a day. What's interesting though, is 1 million of those people are on the bus, and 800,000 of those people are on the train. So back to our history, 1950s, we realized we had a problem, so we built commuter rail so people could get back into the city where they used to love to live, but they didn't want to live there anymore, so they could get back into the city to their jobs. And the advent of ride sharing, the year I was born. So it is possible to live without a car. In this case, there was a barter system. I'm not going to even comment on what they were probably bartering back then in the 70s. You could tell by looking at this guy. But the infrastructure